So let's now scroll up to the navigation and we are going to the section for returning references. If we click on this one, returning by reference is useful when you want to use a function to find to which variable a reference should be bound. Do not use return by reference to increase performance. The engine will automatically optimize this on its own. Only return references when you have a valid technical reason to do so. To return references, use this syntax. This one is for the object-oriented programming because it uses classes, so don't worry about this. It's not in the scope of this course. Again, in this example, the property of the object returned by the get value, obviously that refers to the previous example. And then we have a note. Unlike parameter passing, here you have to use and in both places to indicate that you want to return by reference, not a copy, and to indicate that reference binding rather than usual assignment should be done for value. Let's quickly go back to our editor and have a look at an example. We are going to have a variable year with say 1970, and then we're going to define a function called update year. Now, rather than having this as a standard function, we are going to do this the reference function, and then we are going to require the argument, which is also going to be used as by reference. So we are going to use this and symbol, and then we call it value simply. Okay, in between curly brackets, we are going to increase the value by 1, so value plus plus, and then we return it, so value. Again, we couldn't do it like this because we have to just we cannot return expressions. It has to be a variable that's returned by reference. And then we are gonna go for, say, new year equals say we're going to use this and symbol and update year function, and then we pass this year as an argument. Now what we do in this statement which we just read was saying that when you're using functions by reference, then unlike with variables, when you are actually calling them, you have to use this and symbol at the beginning as well. So it's not just the definition, it's also when you are calling them, when you are assigning, doing the assignment basically. Because when you pass them as a reference to another functions in the previous example, then we don't have to do it. But if we are calling it directly and assigning the reference to, let's say, variable like here, then we have to use this and symbol at the beginning, as well as when we actually defining the function. So this way we've associated whatever's assigned the value. We pointed basically this new year variable to the same value that's going to be associated with this year variable. So if we now echo it, echo new year. If we save it and preview it in a browser, go back, refresh the page, 1971. What's happened here? Obviously, we passed through 1970. We incremented this value by 1, which is giving us 1971. And obviously, that's been returned. So now new year has this new value. But what's going to happen next if we are to overwrite the year value, say 2015, echo new year? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's going to be incremented, or it's just going to simply return 2015? And I'm going to actually comment this first one so we have just one value displayed in the browser. If we save it, preview it in the browser, refresh the page, it gives us 2015. And this is giving us this value because we are not recalling the guts of this function. Basically, we are not triggering this function by the first trigger. We only pointed this variable to this one basically because it's been taken by the reference. The first time around we increased the value. The second time around we simply updated the value manually by basically reassigning different value to this year variable. But we didn't call this function again to trigger this post incrementation. It's just a pointer through this function. The first time it's called, it incremented and pointed us, because we are pointed by the reference, this new year to this year variable basically, which we've passed through as an argument. And now whenever I'm going to update this value, I'm just going to copy all this and paste it underneath. I'm going to change it to say 2215, and if we save it, preview it in the browser, there we go, we've got 2015, 2215. So basically, anytime we are going to change the value of this one will have exactly the same value because they point into the same content, basically the same value. So that's how it works when you actually deal with the referencing the function. It's pretty much the same way we could as well, obviously, if we didn't want this first time round incrementation being done, we could obviously do something like, let's say, new year and then just year, and it's going to do precisely the same thing. So if we save it, refresh the page, and there we go, the result is the same. Obviously, the first time around, this one would not be incremented because we're not dealing with this function at all. But if you need to do it this way, obviously, if you need to the first time around modify the value of the original variable that you're passing through as an argument, that's obviously an option you could use. Now let's have a look at another example. Let's first create this print array function again. So function print array, and we are going to pass array, and the argument name will be array as well. By default, it's going to be an empty array. And what we're going to start is with this OB start, as well as we did before. Then we echo pre-tag, then we print R function, and we pass this array to it as an argument, and then echo closing pre-tag. So all this is going to be added to this buffer, and then we return all this as a string. So return get clean OB get clean. There we go, that's the one. Okay, so this is our function, our helper function, like as you may call it. And then we're gonna have function, which we will make a reference again. So collector, we're going to call it. And I've taken this name from a documentation as well, one of the examples in the documentation as well. But example is going to be slightly different than in a documentation as well. So we're going to start with the first variable inside of this specific function. Now we're not passing any arguments, but we are going to create the first variable, which will have a static keyword prepended to it, static, and then we're going to call it collection, which will be an array. And now static is something that you will mostly find in object-oriented programming, but we can also use it with the functions. What the static does for us is whenever this function is called, the value associated with the static variable will be updated, meaning that whatever the previous call to this function made to this specific variable or array will be basically updated. So if we have, let's say, one item in the array, and if the next call will add an item to the array, then we're gonna have two items in the array. Basically, it's static, meaning that it's basically keeps the values all the time. So you can call this function as many times as you want, and it will keep all these values, unless you obviously remove them as well from the using the call to the function. Okay, and once we've done this static collection array, we are going to return this collection. So basically, what this function does, it returns an array. So now if we scroll down a little bit, I'm going to create a few new lines here so we can see things clearer. And what I'm going to do is create the collection variable. And I'm going to associate this collection basically array by calling this collector function on it. Basically associating by reference again. So now what I want to do, now this collection, because we've returned this static array, has become an array basically. And now let's use this collection variable, and what we are going to do is add item to this array. So square brackets, then equal symbol, and we are going to add first space collection. So if we now print this array to see what's inside of this collection array, if we save it, preview it in a browser, refresh the page, and we see nothing, and this is obviously because I didn't use the echo statement. You may remember we are returning from this print array because we are using output buffering. So if we refresh the page now, we can see that we have this first collection item. Okay, so that was pretty simple, right? Now let's try and do something like create a collection, variable collection 2, and do the same thing. Let's create the reference. Let's create the pointer to this collector function, which obviously will point to this collection array. And now what I'm going to do is collection 2, I'm going to add another item to this collection. And this time I'm going to call it second collection. And semicolon after this. Now if I print again, echo print array, and I'm going to pass the collection to it. If we save it and preview it in the browser, there we go. Now the first one which we've defined, which we've created the pointer to, is, because it's still the first collection variable, as you can see, it contains both of them. And if we go back to the editor, have a look at this. We called the collection, which is the first one, the first reference to this function, and then we created another one and we added the second item. But now this first one contains the second item as well. And this is because this static collection, if I remove this static keyword from in front of it, and if we go back, refresh the page, we only get the first one because this static allows us to keep the values from the previous call to this function. Basically, the static allows us to basically, whatever we've added before, keep it. And if the second one is called, this one will already have this first item in. So this variable will contain this first item, and we are now adding to it the second item. So this one will have the same values in this collection array as this one. Now we can obviously call it probably a little bit different, because let's say, because it may be a little bit confusing. You might be thinking that we are referring this one is the same as this. It's not. It's basically for the internal purpose. Obviously, these are the private this is the private variable of this collector function, and these are global variables which we've created here. So keeping it this way, now both of them point to the same value, basically. So if we create another print on, this time let's print our second collection. If we save it, preview it in the browser, refresh the page, there we go. Both of them, as you can see, are exactly the same. And we can also do what we did before, and I'm going to just remove these two here, and I'm going to do var underscore dump just to check if they both are collection identical, triple equal single pool collection 2, and if we preview in the browser, we get true. Yes, they are, because they point to exactly same value with the exactly same data type. It's exactly the same thing, basically. So whenever we are going to update it, let's say let's go back to what we had before with these two print R's. And now what I'm going to do is add to collection. The first collection, I'm going to add first collection, second entry. And let's duplicate this and add another one to the second one. And we're going to have second collection, second entry. And both of these should now have exactly same values. Again, as you can see, we can update one and it's going to update the other. We can update second one and it's going to update the first one, because they point to exactly same value, which is obviously this static call variable inside of this collector function. Okay, let's go back to the browser and let's now click on this unsetting references, which is the last item we're going to have a look at. And unsetting references. When you unset the reference, you just break the binding between variable name and variable content. This does not mean that variable content will be destroyed. For example, and this is a very simple example here, let's try all this actually in the editor. I'm just going to copy all this, go back to our editor, replace what we have here with this example. And what we want to do also is to echo b after we've unset it. So first of all, let's do echo b here before we unset it. And then after we unset the a variable. So if we refresh the page, both of them are 1. As you can see, even though we've unset a, so this one does not exist, a variable does not exist after this unset anymore. It's just completely gone. But because we pointed originally to the value associated with this a variable, not to the variable itself, this statement basically points to the same value. The value which is associated with the variable represented by variable a. But then we've unset it, however, value is still there, and b points still to the same value. But if we try and echo, obviously, a variable, now we're going to get error. If we preview this in a browser, there we go, notice undefined variable a. And that's because we've already unset it. If we tried before unsetting it, then that's going to work. We're going to have triple 1, because its first one is for the b, for the a, and for the b. So that's basically how you would unset references in PHP.